Yo, what up guys, Joe here. Today we're going to be building a mid-range AMD based gaming PC for around 700 USD. Now I am going to be taking you guys step by step as to how to assemble the PC. We're then going to be putting this PC to the test against popular titles such as Battlefield 1, GTA 5, ARC, as well as others. As for a full list of the parts used in this build, that will be located in the video's description. But to sum it up, I chose to go with an 8GB MSI RX 580 mainly because of its red colorway to match the red and black theme of the build. Our CPU choice was the 1500X with 4 cores and 8 threads, which will do a great job of supporting our RX 580 in modern games. But if you were planning on using your PC for tasks outside of just gaming, like for video rendering or streaming, then I would strongly recommend considering the 1600 or 1600X Ryzen 5 CPU instead, as these CPUs offer 6 cores and 12 threads, which would really help speed up the time it takes to render a video as well as help improve the smoothness of a stream overall. For the RAM, I used a red Ballistix Sport 8GB kit rated at 2400 MHz, and for the motherboard, I used the MSI ATX B350M Gaming Pro. To store all of our games, I used a 1TB WD Blue hard drive. Powering the build was the EVGA 430W power supply, and housing all of our parts was the Phanteks Eclipse series P400 case. Now with that out of the way, let's start assembling our PC. So first things first, unpack the motherboard and place it on top of its box. Next, we're going to install the CPU onto the motherboard, but first remove the 4 screws surrounding the CPU socket. If the motherboard backplate falls out of place, make sure to put it back as this is what our heatsink is going to be screwing onto. Now the CPU is going to have an arrow on one of its 4 corners. The motherboard will also be labeled with an arrow. So now first lift up the CPU socket lever, align the arrow on the CPU with the one on the motherboard and lightly set the CPU onto the socket. Once that's in, go ahead and pull down the lever. Next, we're going to attach the heatsink onto the motherboard. Now we're using the stock AMD heatsink that came with our CPU, which already has the thermal paste pre-applied, so no need to worry about that. Align the heatsink with the 4 points on the motherboard backplate and screw it into place. Last, connect the heatsink fan onto the CPU fan header on the motherboard. Moving on to our RAM, simply click both sticks into the 2 RAM slots. Okay, so now we're going to secure our motherboard into our case. First, install the I/O shield onto the back side of the case. So for this build, we're using a ATX motherboard. Unfortunately, this case did not come with all the motherboard standoffs in a ATX layout. This will be an easy fix though, as 4 of the standoffs are already in the right place. Go ahead and unscrew 2 of the bottom standoffs that are labeled with just an A. Be sure to have a wrench on hand as the 2 standoffs are screwed on pretty tightly. I first tried a pair of scissors that didn't really work out so well. I later found something with a little more grip that did the trick, but definitely consider investing in a wrench if you don't already have one. Once you unscrewed the 2 standoffs, screw them back into the slots labeled with an M. This one and this one. Align the motherboard with the 6 standoffs and secure it with the screws that came included with the case. Place the power supply into the case with the fan facing down. Use the 4 screws that came with the power supply to secure it to the case. Place the hard drive into the drive cage. As you can see here, we have 2 sets of cables from the power supply and cables from the case. The cables from the case are to connect the USB ports and audio/microphone ports of the case to the motherboard, as well as the power button of the case. I have a fan splitter here which allows us to connect 2 fans into just 1 fan header on our motherboard. And yes, this motherboard has enough fan headers for all our fans, but I didn't want to have a fan cable running through the middle of our motherboard as that would look messy. So plug the fan splitter into the bottom fan header of our motherboard. Proceed to then connect the 2 case fans into our fan splitter. Run the 8-pin and 24-pin power cable to the other side of the case. Plug both the cables into the motherboard. Make sure they're plugged in all the way though. Moving on to the bottom of our motherboard, take the blue USB 3.0 cable and plug it into its slot on the motherboard. There will then be a cable labeled HD audio. Plug this one into the far left side of the motherboard. Okay, so now we're going to be performing some JFP1. These remaining cables are all going to plug into this part of the motherboard. Take your booklet that came with your motherboard and open it up to page 10. Here you will find a chart telling you what needs to be plugged into these 9 pins. The remaining cables are also labeled, so now it's a matter of matching up the cables with the appropriate pins according to the chart. So HDD LED, check. Power switch, check. Reset switch, check. And we're done with that. Now get the SATA cable that came included with the motherboard. Plug one end of the SATA cable into the motherboard and plug the other end into the hard drive. Plug the SATA power cable from the power supply to the hard drive. Next we're going to install our graphics card. Remove 2 of the back plates and click the card into its slot on the motherboard. Secure the card with the 2 screws you removed from the back plates and connect the power supply cable labeled PCIe to the graphics card. We're now going to install an optional LED strip to light up the inside of our case. This kit came with 2 strips. I'm only going to be using 1 strip. The LEDs are controlled by a small remote included with the kit. They will be powered by SATA just like our hard drive, so connect that. Last, connect this final cable of the case to a SATA power cable as well. This powers the lights in front of the case. And we're done building the gaming PC. Now we're going to need an OS to boot to. Plug in a USB stick with the Windows 10 OS into one of the ports on the PC. When powering on the PC, keep pressing F11 till you're in the boot menu and select the USB stick. Once you're up and running, go to AMD's website to download and install the drivers for the graphics card. You can then go to your motherboard manufacturer's website to download any drivers you may need. So to download some games, download Origin for Battlefield 1, you can download Blizzard for Overwatch, and Steam for pretty much everything else. Done. Now let's start testing out some games.
Okay.
Lit, no. How did I...